Welcome back to Mr. Austin talking about the Peasants' Revolt. In my last video I talked about the causes of the Peasants' Revolt, the reasons why the peasants in England in July 1381 are so unhappy. Today I'm going to tell you about what happens next, what happens during the revolt. So just to cast our minds back, remember that the peasants in England in July 1381 are not happy, to put it mildly. They are not happy about their life. Their life is pretty rubbish in their opinion. They're angry about the poll tax that they have to pay. They're angry about their lack of freedom, or the villeins in particular are angry about their lack of freedom. They're angry about poor wages. They're angry about the king's advisors, who they think are pretty rubbish. They're angry about the arrest and imprisonment of John Ball, a priest who they quite like, because he says that all men are equal, or all people are equal, and they like that idea. So when John Ball gets arrested, they're not very happy about that. They're unhappy about all those reasons and more. There are more reasons that I haven't even mentioned. In general, they're very, very angry. But what kicks it off? What's the trigger? Well, the trigger is the poll tax, really. The poll tax, as I mentioned before, is very unpopular with the peasants, because remember, the peasants pay exactly the same amount of money as the rich, the nobles and the lords. Now the nobles and the lords can afford to pay the tax very easily. It's nothing to them. But for the peasants, it's an awful lot of money. When you don't have an awful lot of money and you have to pay this poll tax, it's an awful lot of money for them. So they think it's very unfair. And many peasants don't pay it deliberately, on purpose. They don't pay this poll tax, and they try and get away with it. And King Richard finds out about this, and so he sends out commissioners, basically tax collectors, to collect the tax. And when the commissioners are sent to a particular village in Essex called Fobbing, rather than hand over their tax, the peasants choose instead to chop off the heads of the commissioners, to remove their heads of the tax collectors, the commissioners. And from then on, it spreads. This revolt spreads. It starts off in this small village in Essex, and more of the surrounding towns and villages hear about this, and the peasants in these towns and villages like this idea, and the revolt really springs up from there, and it grows and grows and grows and spreads. And after about 5 or 6 days of this revolt, a leader emerges among these peasants called Wat Tyler. Wat Tyler. Yeah. So he is the leader of the peasants, or he emerges as the leader of the peasants. We don't know a huge deal about Wat Tyler. He's a very mysterious figure in history. We know he's a peasant who's angry, hence why he joins the Peasants' Revolt. Legend has it that he joined the revolt because one of the commissioners came to his village to collect the tax, and asked to collect tax off Wat's daughter. And Wat said, "My daughter is younger than 14, so therefore should not pay the tax." And the commissioner disagreed, and this really angered Wat Tyler and insulted him, so he joined the revolt straight away. We don't know how true that is, but it's a story that's been spread by quite a few people. For whatever reason, Wat Tyler joins the revolt and emerges as a leader. He's got some real charisma about him. He can lead men very easily. People listen to him. So Wat Tyler leads these peasants to Canterbury to begin with, and he leads them to Canterbury because he wants to free John Ball. John Ball, if you'll remember, was the priest who was preaching the idea that all people were equal. So the nobles and the lords and the peasants were equal, and he'd been locked up for this. He'd been locked up for these ideas. So Wat Tyler leads the peasants to Canterbury and frees John Ball, and Ball becomes a leader alongside Wat Tyler, really. It's Wat Tyler and John Ball leading this peasants' revolt. So next they go to London. They march to London, and somehow they make it into London, over London Bridge. Again, we're not quite sure how they make it through London Bridge, because there was a drawbridge on London Bridge. Whether they talked their way through it or maybe threatened to burn the bridge down, we don't know. But for whatever reason, they make their way over London Bridge and into London. Now, it's relatively peaceful at first. Now, you've got to remember that many of these peasants had never even left their village until now. or maybe they'd been to the next village along, or maybe even the nearest town. But most of them, nearly all of them, had never been to London. Now, London wasn't quite as big and amazing and bright as it is today, but it was certainly the biggest place that these peasants had ever seen, with huge buildings and things that they just weren't used to, including the pubs that had many exciting drinks in there that they maybe had never tried before. So they actually spend the first few hours walking around London in almost amazement, a little bit like tourists, basically. But by nightfall, their violent temperament, their revolting hats are back on. And they end up trashing London, raiding into palaces and really causing a mess, for want of a better phrase, and really causing a lot of chaos. And King Richard hears about this, and on the 14th of June he agrees to meet the peasants, and he meets them at a place called Mile End. And when he meets them, he calls out to the peasants and says, "What do you want?" basically. And the peasants give him a big list of what they want. They want their freedom, they want better wages, they want an end to the poll tax, etc. There's a huge list of things that they want. And King Richard amazingly says, "Yes, you can have it. You can have it all. As long as you go home now, please. Stop making a mess, stop causing chaos in London. Go home and I will give you everything you've just asked for." However, the problem here is Wat Tyler and John Ball are not there. Wat Tyler and John Ball have gone to the Tower of London, and they've gone to the Tower of London to look for one person in particular, and that person is Simon of Sudbury. Now, he is the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is the man who has actually imprisoned John Ball in the first place. He's the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he is also the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which means he's in charge of all the money in the country. And if he's in charge of all the money, he's also in charge of the tax. Now remember, taxes are something that the peasants are really angry about, the poll tax in particular. So Simon of Sudbury really kind of represents everything the peasants are angry about. So Wat Tyler and John Ball lead a small band of peasants into the Tower of London. They find Simon of Sudbury, they take him out of the tower, and they behead him. They chop his head off. And believe it or not, it takes 8 blows of the axe, literally 1, 2, 3, 4, you get the idea, 8 of those to take Simon of Sudbury's head off. It must have been a very blunt axe. And Simon is actually alive on the 8th blow, the one that actually finally takes his head off his shoulders. He's still alive on that last blow. So yeah, that really must have been not the nicest way of dying. Yeah, quite unpleasant. Anyway, Wat Tyler and John Ball and the peasants have killed Simon of Sudbury, and the chaos is continuing. And so the following day, on the 15th of June, the peasants once again meet King Richard at a place called Smithfield. And Wat Tyler rides out to meet King Richard, and once again kind of gives his list of what the peasants want. And again, King Richard says, "You can have it. You can have it all, as long as you go home and stop causing chaos." And what happens next, we are not 100% sure on. The only thing we know for sure is Wat Tyler is killed. We don't really know what he did in order to get killed. We don't know the circumstances, because there are so many different stories about what happened. There are some stories that say Wat Tyler spat in the king's face. There are some stories that say Wat Tyler insulted the mayor of London and it was the mayor of London who attacked him, or that Wat Tyler tried to attack the king's men. We really don't know, but what we do know is Wat Tyler is killed by the king's men, by some of the king's men. And so the peasants are now in shock. "Oh my word, where's our leader gone?" Well, there he is, he's dead on the floor. What are we going to do? And King Richard, remember this 14-year-old King Richard, very bravely rides out to the peasants and says, again, "You can have whatever you want, as long as, 1, you don't kill me, and B, you follow me peacefully out of Smithfield." And unfortunately the peasants fall for this, and they follow King Richard into the fields surrounding Smithfield, where many of the king's knights are waiting for them. And at that point the peasants know that the game is up, Many of these peasants are imprisoned. Many of them are also beheaded as well. So it wasn't the ending that they were all hoping for. They went to London hoping to make their life much better, and for many of them it ended in the end of their lives. And again, Richard does not keep these promises, so he doesn't give them their freedom, he doesn't give them higher wages. They don't get what they want. So really, from that point of view, the Peasants' Revolt is a humongous failure.